Welcome to Inaudible. I'm your host, Jeremy Weiland, and I'm joined by my co-host, Ryan Masterson. On this podcast, we discuss the weird, beautiful channeled messages found in the long tradition of contact with the Confederation of Planets in service to the one infinite creator. These messages articulate a philosophy of spiritual evolution, popularly known as the Law of One. Many of these messages are available to listen to on our sister podcast, Living Love and Light, available on all platforms. We seek to provide analysis and commentary on this philosophy described in these messages, identifying the common themes and grappling with the application of this information to our human lives. However, we are not counselors, gurus, or experts of any kind, so please evaluate our words in light of our shortcomings and use your own best judgment. And thanks for listening. Good morning, Ryan. How's it going?
Good morning. It's going very well. I actually got up at 4, don't judge, 4:20 this morning. I woke up at 4 a.m. feeling so refreshed. And I thought I could either go back to bed, and I know that when I wake up to do this recording, I'm going to be sleepy, or I can just flow with my sleep cycle and get up. So I got up, made a little coffee, and I'm feeling unusually spry for 5 a.m. in the morning. So we're good.
That's great.
We're good.
I've been regularly waking up at 5 and I've been kind of coming to my own conclusion that's similar to yours, that I can lay in bed for an hour. I like to get up at 6. But look, if the body says get up at 5, why fight it, you know?
Totally.
Like, that gives me even more time in the morning, which I'm really, really happy about.
Totally. I think my issue is that I never feel, what's the word? Like, the mornings are not my time to be creative, active. Like, I don't work out well in the morning. I'm best in the afternoon. But maybe that's because I just don't feel refreshed in the morning. So if I can get this feeling again, where I just wake up naturally, I'm going to roll with it, because I feel much better this morning than typically. So
Yeah.
whatever it is, maybe it's because I went to bed early. I don't know.
Yeah, I've been going to bed a lot earlier lately, and I expect to wake up and feel more fully rested than before. And I think the big thing for me is that I don't feel as well rested as I think I should. So I don't know how well rested I should feel. Like, it is what it is.
Sure.
So
Interesting.
yeah. Fascinating.
Well, for a little inside baseball for all the listeners, we tried to do this recording last week, and per usual, we found more quirks in our software or whatever. So we're doing a do-over this week.
I'm kind of grateful, to be honest.
Sure.
I mean, it sucks to lose, an hour of our time in the morning, especially your morning. It's so much earlier for you. But I get another chance to tie all the pieces together, to weave something. And, sometimes I lack focus. So this gives me another opportunity to achieve that focus.
Me too. Me too. I think both of us ended last week. We're like, well, that sucks, but phew.
Yeah. No, I definitely felt that way. I definitely felt like, man, I get another chance. Outstanding.
Well, what we're chatting about today is, a few things, I suppose, like the usual, but the core is a session from February 7th, 1982, where Hatonn, it's very brief, at least Hatonn's portion, but it's about humility. And I recently did this or published this on the Living Love and Light production, and thought this would be an interesting subject. Again, it's very brief, but it says so much. It says so much.
Yeah, it's a good one, but like, I feel like it's an embarrassment of riches right now in 82. There is so much good stuff coming out from Hatonn and Latwi especially. And you're seeing this pattern emerge of how the LL circle relates to these entities, where it's going to start being more and more Jim taking the reins of answering questions, Carla more and more taking the reins of the monologue at the beginning, and Latwi handling questions, Hatonn doing the sermon. So it's kind of cool to see like right where that inflection is occurring, and they're starting to get a pattern. It's cool for me because I'm trying to find just a similar pattern in my own practice of channeling. We just had a session last night, and because I don't do it on a weekly or daily basis like the LL group did, I feel like it is just taking so much longer to get patterns in place that allow for me to be creative on the things that the channel requires creativity for, right? The flexibility to really go with any kind of impressions you get, while not having to make it all up from scratch in terms of the pattern and the program involved.
Yeah, I can see how, well, it's just true with anything, building a habit, building flow, and a certain level of, being comfortable with something where that allows you that flexibility and creativity just takes reps. And there's a difference between doing something daily and doing it weekly or monthly,
Yeah, I in particular, I think it's the group energy that is kind of so. It's such a different thing from when I practice every morning. Suddenly I'm on the spot, and it takes a long time to get over yourself and just relax with that. Although the upside of it is how much more invigorating contact is with others in the room.
I can't speak to experience.
Yeah.
I can't
And
speak with
it's not
experience.
necessary because we're talking about the channeling that LL did, not the channeling that the working group does.
This is true.
So why don't we jump in? Do we want to start at the beginning and read through this?
Yeah, well, let's nail down the fun parts. There's a few, you know, there's a few parts in this channeling that would be good to review. It starts, again, this is February 7th, 1982, and L is channeling Hatonn. And after the intro, Hatonn speaks, "We of Hatonn would like at this time to share with you a story, one in which a child is born, lives, and dies in the manner of your density, yet accomplishes a great deal more than is obvious to those who shared his presence. The child of whom we speak was in no way outstanding, either physically or mentally. The child was of inauspicious parentage, having been raised of poor parents in a small village. When the child reached maturity, he joined himself with a woman, for he sought the comfort that this type of companionship could provide. As things progress in your density, the child grew older, fathered children, grew older again, and eventually died." Now, when I read this, I'm like, okay, Hatonn, that interesting story, cool story, bro. That's what I thought. But then Hatonn essentially takes the words out of my mouth with the next paragraph.
Yeah.
Not a very impressive tale of a life, you might assume. Yet the child accomplished in this brief lifespan that which he set out to do. The learning which the individual had prescribed for himself prior to this incarnation did occur. And although this individual did not attain great wisdom, did not even obtain the realization of choice between service to self or service to others, still the individual attained that which he set out to do. Thanks, Hatonn. Of course, Hatonn goes on. Essentially that, you know what, there's a lot of people in the world like this. Maybe they don't have the realization of the choice. Maybe they have simple lives, but maybe that is their purpose. And this could be me projecting here, but it makes me think, who am I to judge that? Who are we to judge that?
Well, what would be the reason for judging is kind of where I go. Like, I agree with
Hmm.
you. I don't think you or I or many of the seekers who subscribe to this philosophy are looking for a pat on the back from the universe or from each other in terms of our seeking. By the time we take it seriously in our own lives, it's something we're doing for ourselves. But I think often, perhaps, there is confusion when we encounter other people because we recognize that they are ourselves. They are other ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
um, and yet they seem to be on a completely different they seem to be in a completely different place than we are. And they don't prioritize what we prioritize. The more that we take it seriously, the more it calls into question that serious stance when we see others not take it seriously. Often society is practically created by our mutual reinforcement of values, our mutual recognition of norms of behavior and what is polite and what is right. And when a seeker starts their own path of seeking, I know for me, it was often the case that I had to regularly reckon with those ways in which other selves were not going to reflect my priorities back to myself. In fact, they were going to
Mm.
reflect the exact opposite. And one way of looking at it is that, well, they didn't choose to go down this path. Another
Mm-hmm.
way of looking at it is that they're on the path, but it's just a different part of the path. I can't even say if it's before or after where I'm at. I
Mm-hmm.
really can't, because there's really no way to spiritually judge another person, as the Confederation often reiterates. So what I do have to work with is to see what they are in the moment reflecting back to me. That doesn't require me to make a judgment of them or where they are in their path or anything like that. It simply is a way to see a reflection of myself.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to read one of the paragraphs here. Hatonn continues, "It is often difficult to extend your love to some who fall within this group, for their confusion seems to abrade their lack of awareness, makes them appear almost another species, a duller, dimmer species, somehow distantly related to your own. My friends, they are not merely your own species. These are your own selves. It is not our desire to chastise, for judgment is not ours." Here, Hatonn is leading by example. I like that.
Yeah.
Rather, it is our desire to encourage that you may, in perceiving your other selves as such, find your hearts less reluctant to share your love with them. Loving is not always an easy task, and on some occasions is poorly rewarded. But my brothers, is reward what you seek? Therefore, we would humbly implore that you extend yourselves that love which you extend to us. This idea of reward, is this why we love others?
Mm-hmm.
Or, may I put this another way, is this why some of us are so excited to share the law of one philosophy and the raw contact with other people? Because we feel like, personally, I feel like I found this philosophy, this approach. It's been entirely helpful for me. And a younger version of me would just be itching to tell everybody about it.
Yeah.
And it's because I want them to feel what I have felt, and I want them
Mm-hmm.
to improve how I feel I have improved. But that would really be, for me, that would be stroking my own ego. Me feeling valuable because I'm able to help others with what I perceive to be helpful. And this whole theme, the theme of this whole session of being humble and having humility, is just a good reminder that it's okay for me to not do that, to just accept others and to just love them and not judge where they're at, and trust that, like you say all the time, Jeremy, everyone is on the spiritual path. Everything is spiritual, whether you call it explicitly so. Everything is spiritual. So it's okay for me to take a step back and just accept people for who they are, where they're at, and just show them love.
Absolutely. I think a lot of times when we encounter the other who doesn't seem to reflect the image we want to see of ourselves, that can be disturbing. And that can also shake our faith in our path. Oh, that guy's not walking on the path. Does he know something I don't? You know, am I really a fool for taking all of this seriously? I mean, that's often what I think when I'm at my low moments. It's, what am I doing all of this for? And that's a great question to pose to oneself. What are you doing all this for? It would be a great question for the other self to pose to him or herself. What is he or she doing all this for? What are any of us doing all of this for? This is the mystery of life, right? What I am thinking about more and more in my meditations is the aspects of love that are creative in answering that question in a billion different ways, right? It's tough because love is such an all-encompassing and vast creative and destructive force of the universe that what it means in any given moment is is anybody's guess. And yet, what it seems like we're working on in third density is a way of kind of, hitting the bullseye blindfolded, trying to figure out a level of channeling love that is so refined, that is so able to be balanced in spite of conditions of self and conditions of life, that we can be helpful in any situation. I think that's a big part of attaining the epitome of what wanderers can do on this plane, is being able to be helpful and to trust that our helpfulness is helpful in any situation. The reason I think that is because life throws such a variety of situations at us, and yet those variety of situations tend to reflect a certain finite number of lessons that we're dealing with. It implies to me that like the barriers that keep us back from fully expressing the Creator in every moment are actually not that big, but it is the ability to practice this over and to drill it over and over and over again that we're working on here.
I can see that, because it definitely feels like the same lessons keep coming back and forth. Every year I ask myself, why am I still dealing with this? Why does this keep happening?
I've been thinking the very same thing. And I think it's particularly interesting that they pointed out the encounter with the other self who is perhaps in the sinkhole of indifference between service to others and service to self, because that throws into stark relief our own choice to make a plunge into a commitment that will require continual effort, continual exertion of ourselves. It would be much easier to just ramble through life like we used to do, right? To not have that sometimes crushing weight that comes with seeking. It is often a burden. There is no doubt about it. It isn't always a burden, but there are times when it would be easier to just shut down and go through life with, a lot less pressure.
Well, we certainly don't need to put that pressure on ourselves. I mean, there's like, what is that pressure? How would you define that pressure? Is that pressure to, how do I say this? What I'm thinking right now is that some people feel pressure to change the world, while others just feel pressure to change themselves. And
I think it's the disjointed nature of transformation, if I'm honest, and can see this idea through. It is the fact that we recognize a trajectory we are on, and yet we are not there. We are not at the destination yet. And so the parts of us that recognize or start to see the destination coming into a very vague view are pulling us more than the parts of us that are still trying to balance what that view would mean at that level that part of us is working. It's such a clumsy thing to talk about, but I do think that like there are clues in the archetypal images about the disjointed nature of seeking, the way in which parts of you move quicker than other parts, and they need to wait up. I think maybe that is what other selves reflect back to us when they have not polarized perhaps as much as we have, is that there are still parts of us that have not polarized as much as we would like.
Certainly.
I mean, that the paragraph you skipped over is kind of interesting in this regard. Hatonn says, "There are many in your world today who are like this child. The lessons towards which you strive exist for them far in their future. For as one must learn to walk before one may run, one must first learn to crawl." I think there are parts of ourselves that no matter how far along the path we are still crawling relative to other parts of ourselves. This is the conundrum we get into when we abide separation, when we are in an illusion where we entertain the fiction of being separate from the Creator. Well, separation from the Creator also implies separation within ourselves ad infinitum, right? There's no end to that separation. That's why the only way to really reason about ultimate things, imperishable things, is to reason from the point of unity, of oneness, because otherwise you will just be searching for a smaller and smaller particle, to use the physics metaphor, right? There will always be a smaller particle to find. There will always be a part of yourself to recover and bring along, until you recognize that you are already at oneness, and it is a matter of the way that you look at yourself and look at your experience that changes things.
Yes. I like the remainder of that paragraph that I skipped over. "We would suggest to you, therefore, to be generous in your hearts to your other selves, your other brothers and sisters of this world. For although they have not attained your awareness, although the revelations which you seek and hold so dear are not revealed to them, we urge you to realize that their lessons to them are equally important, that their learning is paid for with as many tears and as much pain as your own." And I think that last line is a fantastic lesson. Kind of doesn't matter where we are at. Our lessons are our own, and it's the same amount of pain. I know I brought this up in the dry run of this session, but there's a guy I follow, a leadership coach and former Navy SEAL, Jocko Willink, who when he was active military and he was trying to keep his guys alive, his high school daughter, or his young daughter, was going through lessons of her own, where her friend isn't talking to her, and she's super stressed, and it's she's having a hard time, and in his mind he's thinking, "Honey, this is no big deal. Like, you're going to be fine. I am trying to keep these guys alive. Like, talk about problems." But then even he comes to a realization that, well, she's in a different place in her life than I am right now. And to her, this may be the biggest challenge she has ever faced. And, he needs to be patient. He needs to understand that, she's at a different place and he can respect that. For her, if this is the biggest thing she's dealt with, she needs help getting through it, no matter what it is, So that applies for everybody. The lessons I'm teaching my 4-year-old or the lessons he is learning are very different than the lessons I, as an almost 40-year-old, are learning, But that doesn't diminish the necessity or the power of those lessons, the challenge of those lessons that we're going through.
Yeah, and when we measure our sorrows against others' sorrows by the ways they present in the illusion, we forget that what matters is this emotional experience, not the details that bring it about. Like, what matters is the feeling of pain and suffering and the growth that comes from that, regardless of whether you, as a particular individual, think it worthy or not. This is something I've talked about before, but like that common experience of pain and suffering is something that can be tapped into. You don't have to agree with the proximate reasons that brought that pain and suffering about. It's still pain and suffering. Like, this is something I experience a lot of times when I make the grand mistake of going online and looking at like TikTok or YouTube or something, and seeing, for example, choosy beggars or something, like some subreddit like that, where people are complaining about how bad they have it, and it seems so superficial what they're upset about, but like nobody goes and shows their ass like that unless they really are suffering on some level, right? Like, even if it is ridiculous, and I remember suffering in ways that in retrospect seem ridiculous. And I am sure that some people look at the things that I deal with in my life and are like, what the hell are you complaining about? The issue is that these subjective experiences that we have within ourselves cannot often be translated exactly in their details to others. They are subjective. They are things that they are corners we have painted ourselves into. No one else painted themselves into that corner. We painted ourselves into that corner. And often, this is what you were talking about earlier, we think that our way of getting out of that corner is the way everybody gets out of that corner. And that's just not the case. I am absolutely certain that there is a different path. If we are going to judge the path by the actual rocks and pebbles underneath our feet and the actual position on the map that path takes, we are all on different paths. What makes it the same is that it has a progression to it, and that it has challenges. And what those challenges actually manifest in people's emotional lives is not for me to say, but it is so much more comforting if I can say, well, you should just read the law of one, and then everything will work out for you like it worked out for me. Well, that's not at all in some cases, that's even kind of an unloving thing to do, right? Because you're expecting somebody to approach what matters to you on the same exact terms that you did.
Yes.
And that's just not where they're at. So you're not meeting somebody where they're at, I should say. This is something that Steve Tyman wrote about in his book, A Fool's Phenomenology, Archetypes of Spiritual Evolution. And he's talking about ambition. And I think in some cases, when we try to help others, we can confuse ambition to realize another ourselves, right? To realize another self just like us, with the desire to help that person as they are. And he writes, in one part, ambition is will to power and domination. In one part, idealism is blind urge to assert the template of my personal idiosyncratic significator upon the world. My personal way in which I have balanced the equation. I want to put that on the world and make the whole world reflect my personal story. Like that I find happens to me a lot. And it's honestly, at the end of the day, it's a kind of laziness, an inability to reckon with just how much variety and nuance exists in the world, because I want to make it simple. I want to comfort myself that my path was the one that was right for me. And by imposing that on others, I make it right for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's hard to.
And I reinforce my own rightness.
Yes. Yeah.
It shows how much I don't really believe what I say if I need to go out there and ask others to validate my path, right?
I think that's a hard hitting point. If you believe it, if you really believe it, do you need that constant validation from others? You know, or are you looking for a constant confirmation that, oh, yes, okay, this is correct, you know? But then why are you looking to others to tell you what is correct? Well, maybe because you don't believe it, or, you know, so yeah, that's a fantastic point.
Whereas when you know that you stand on solid ground, when you know that you're coming from a deep and authentic place in your own beingness, there's nothing but radiation. There's nothing but love. And you realize that the moment and the details of the moment that meet you are unique. And you have to go and find that part of yourself that is the common denominator with the other person, right? Mm-hmm. It can't be this like philosophy that you've erected on top of that common denominator. That's for you. That's your experience. That's how you balance. But to help somebody else, you have to get down to that common denominator. And that is love at the end of the day, I believe. If it seems like it isn't love, well, that just calls into question our definition of love, which is something that the Confederation is always pushing back on us. To recognize that love is so much more than what we want it to be, what's useful for our subjective experience. It is something that actually created the heavens and earth and all the galaxies and destroys them and collapses them in the black holes. And all of that is available to us on some level. Mm-hmm. If we can meet people where they're at and we can show them love in spite of it being something that is uncomfortable for us or alien to us, something that doesn't even validate us, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Then we have done, I believe, a genuine service.
I know I've said this before, but I view the law of one as a very handy template, a mental map to navigate the world. And as you've said, I know I've heard this before, but you reminded me of it, don't mistake the map for the terrain. And it can be very easy to have this mental map and then want to share it with everyone and tell everyone, hey, look, everyone, this is how the world is. But that's not the case. This is just an approach. It's just a map. It's just a way to see the world. And this particular session is just a great reminder that, you know, everyone's in different places. And respect that and love that. And we can use the map, but what is the map for? It's to help us progress in that, hopefully, more consistent expression of love to others, the more consistent acceptance of others and where they're at. And but that doesn't mean we have to hand out maps to everybody we see.
Nope. In fact, the best thing, in many ways, the best thing to do, and how to do this is the whole challenge, but the best thing to do is to awaken them to what their own map would be, to help them connect with their own source of love. We don't want, as service to others beings, we do not want others to follow us. We don't want them to depend on us. What we want is for them to find their own guide. And then they become creative, positive, contributing members to the emerging social memory complex. There's a quote that talks about this from September 28th, 1986. It's very short. I'm just going to read this because it's so apt right now. I am Kuo, and my brother, we sympathize greatly with the desire of all such as yourself who seek with a full heart to inspire another to consciously set foot upon that path of seeking the nature of the life experience. And we would only suggest that though many inspiring words may be spoken and offered to such an entity with the hope that it will indeed open the eyes to new possibilities of spiritual sense, that each entity has its own pattern or rhythm of unfolding, which, given sustenance, nourishment, and support from those about it, shall take place in its own time. Who can say what is appropriate for another's journey of seeking, when so much within your illusion is filled with mystery, and when that which is truly important upon the spiritual level moves in ways often unseen, and does its work beyond any man's understanding? Thus, for one to truly be of aid to another, one can only desire to be of such aid and to reflect the love that one has found in as pure a fashion as possible, giving always with an open and cheerful heart without expectation of return, so that the greater will of the one Creator, which has been planted as a seed within all entities, might in its own time be nourished and grow in a fashion which, while perhaps not understood by those about an entity, yet is appropriate to that entity. We don't need to understand another's path. It is not necessary for us to serve. It is only necessary for us to understand our own path and to use that as a means to shine our light and offer what we have. They either want to find that within themselves or they don't. And that is, we know one thing. We can have one element of faith, which is that everybody will find it eventually. We are not necessarily the single, it's not all on our shoulders to wake up every single person we run into. The Master Jesus talked about, casting your love like bread upon the water. You don't know which pieces of bread are going to nourish the birds and which are just going to sink to the bottom and dissolve. It's not up to you to make things take root. It's up to you to plant the seed. And the more purely you can do that, the more you can offer an open-ended opportunity for loving another. That's the great thing about service, is that we typically think of service as this way in which we give another person what they ask for. But honestly, a lot of what it's involved with is freeing another person from any obligation to us, any sort of need to meet us on our terms, but instead to meet our service on their own terms, which means they're allowed to reject it too.
Yes.
And that has to be okay with us in order for it to be a free gift and not something where we're trying to manipulate them into something that validates us.
There was a story I've read. I can't remember if this is in Dolores Cannon's books. I've read this in multiple places, however, and that's in the reincarnation cycle. There's a concept that your last life on Earth, perhaps it's the last life in this density, is typically pretty boring. You're a mailman. You're a farmer. It's straightforward. You're not a person in power. You're not highly influential. You're not you don't have 3 million followers on Instagram or TikTok. It's just a plain vanilla life. And reading that from multiple sources, well, you know what? Forget the fact of whether or not that is factual. Just taking that and just believing it on blind faith. It's a handy reminder that when you come across someone who, from your perspective, may be a bit simple, maybe they're not complex, and where some people might look down on that, it can be a reminder for me that, oh, maybe this is a really advanced, this might be a really advanced soul. They're just living that last life, being happy, loving others where they can, and then they're checking out to whatever's next.
We don't see the process unfolding inside ourselves clearly. Why in the hell would we think that we could notice it within another in any way that is that we can stand upon.
Mm.
This is where humility really comes into play, and I think that's the theme of this segment of Hatonn is to that love is humble. Love gives without expectation, and part of that giving without expectation is not pigeonholing someone. Recognizing that they are a potential on feet, that they are the entire one infinite creator, before you, and that they have just as much ability to achieve enlightenment as you do. In fact, there's a Buddhist tradition. I forget the name of it, but it basically acts as if oneself and all others are already enlightened. And if you look at it that way, then you are able to interpret a lot of things that normally cause suffering as much more balanced and much more didactic and educational on one's path. We are acting out in our lives, perhaps, those lessons that will get us to the next density, and it is only the dilation of time that separates a lesson now from a realization later. But it's the same thing. Mm-hmm. It's part of the same fabric.
Mm-hmm. The idea that keeps popping in my head is just this notion of being rather than doing. And for so many, you just go on the Law of One Reddit subreddit, and so many seekers are out there looking to do, to change, to spread the word, to judge others who are supposedly on that service to self path. And I suppose it's all part of the journey, but I just keep thinking that it's okay to just be. It's okay to just be.
We're gonna do an episode specifically on the service of being as contrasted to the service of doing, because I think especially as you get into late 80s, early 90s Kuo, this becomes this takes center stage. There is one passage on that topic in particular that I just happen to have my book open to. It may not be appropriate, in which case I'll cut this all out. This is Kuo from May 3rd, 1998. The eventual goal of those who wish to be and to move from that flowing beingness is to gradually replace expectation with curiosity. The ways of the mind and of expectations, and so forth, involve energies which seem to grasp and hold and stop the flow of rhythm and attempt to control that rhythm. Frequently, it seems that such manipulation works, and usually entities can convince themselves that they are in control. However, in the spiritual sense, the only control is in how to surrender the small will and the small self to an infinite one, whose wish for all is to give and to receive love. Each time, then, that you find yourself having imaginary conversations, moving into circles of concern and worry, and in general finding oneself knocking up against the corners of life, find ways to stop the momentum of that relationship with what is. Stop. And remember that you are a child of the Creator, a child of eternity, and a child of love itself. You need do nothing but welcome the rhythmic and rightful destiny that awaits. And we are not saying that there is one fate for each entity, for it is our understanding that each has free will, and that each must, of her own free will, choose service to others or service to self. Rather, it is a question of whether you wish to go a straight route or a roundabout route. If there is control attempted in a working pattern, that will change the pattern. The more faith that one is able to express in the moment-to-moment rhythm, the more gently one may meet the unfolding of your particular story, and the shorter will be that moment of centering the self within that identity of being.
That I love that last sentence because it reminds me when Ram Dass notes in a talk he was giving that as he was going through his spiritual journey, he realized that the more empty he became, the more loving he became. And the less he kept trying to actively help others and be others. And the more he just listened and tried to understand and tried to love, then the better he was at doing that.
Yeah, when I'm honest with myself about why I try to strong arm service into a particular form in a particular situation, what it really is fear. That I am afraid that the pure love shining through me without any manipulation by myself is not enough. That the faith comes from recognizing that you don't have to figure it all out yourself. You can simply radiate and have life be a creative act in which you dance with the Creator and participate and cooperate with these energies. And then sometimes you are called upon to provide an intellectual or something of the ego that contributes, but it is a balance that you are learning to achieve. How to balance this ego, how to balance this worldly personality with greater resources that are all part of a dance, all part of a coordinated self. And this coordination is not occurring by your conscious direction. The more that you use meditation and balancing to open up to the deeper parts of yourself and the deeper energies that are available to you, the more you can trust that you don't have to figure it all out in the moment, and you can flow with it as needed. And then whether or not you bring something that you personally have in mind to bear, or you bring in something that you couldn't even possibly imagine, you couldn't even possibly anticipate, that becomes just a matter of what the moment calls for.
I can see it's tough. I can see how it is tough to just let the love shine through and call it at that, and not want to do more or not want to press more or be more, help more, but just have faith that. Speaking of faith, I just finished a long interview. It's on this YouTube channel called Soft White Underbelly, and if you haven't checked it out, check it out. There's some intense interviews on this channel. This particular interview was with an ex-porn star who I guess her name is Chrissy. I think her real name is Chrissy. And Chrissy's telling this terrible story of how she grew up and how she got into the industry and how she ended up getting out. And while she was in the industry, she found Christianity, or maybe she grew up with Christianity, but she was developing her spirituality. And she tells this story where she was essentially looking for a way out. And she went to go meet her boyfriend, who was an actor at the time. And her boyfriend had told all of the other actors that he was dating a porn star. Well, she shows up to set, and this one guy asks her what she does for a living, and she says that she was a model, and he keeps grilling her because he wants her to admit that, she's in the porn industry. And she finally admits it. And by this time, this woman was like, God, I'm on empty. Give me a sign that, just give me a sign, because I'm this close to not believing in you anymore. And when she's on set, this guy, after he gets her to admit that she's a porn star, he asks her if she believes in God. And she goes, yes, maybe a little, defensively. And he goes, there's a way out. Like, if you ask, there's a way out. And she tells this story from this point on of how she just made the choice to stop. This was for God. This was for, this was for her new path. And she committed like 100%. She gave up all of her income. She was earning like $15K a month or something like that. And she just committed, and she just had faith that people would show up to help her when it was needed, that this was the right decision. And if she only committed, that her life would reorient around this new path. And the long story short, that's what it did. But it was a fascinating story to hear. A, because this woman's just been through a terrible time, but then B, just to get another validating story that when you have a certain amount of faith that things will work out, maybe that things are the way they're supposed to be, but if you make the choice, things will work out. But commit, you know. I think it was
Yeah.
that what struck me was the idea of just committing to the choice. I mean, this woman took a left turn and did not look back. And she, you know what, she didn't have money for rent. Well, you know, people would show up and be like, "Hey, I can see you're going through a hard time. Let me handle your rent this month." You know, she run out of food, and all of a sudden someone would show up and be like, "You know, oh, here, let me buy you some groceries." And just a fascinating story. I'd recommend the channel for to every. I'd recommend the channel if you're interested in hearing human stories that are thick, that can be pretty intense.
Yeah, that's a great story. And it's always nice to see these extreme examples of faith because they show they are big ways of showing that energy that of faith that's available to us and how much it takes a leap of faith to commit to a new direction, right? You have to go, you have to take the step and then the ground comes in under your feet, but it isn't there at the beginning. And sometimes I think that these stories, because I love these stories too. I mean, they are incredibly inspirational to me. Sometimes it feels like, well, let me just put it this way. The goal of a life is to find ways of applying faith that don't require so much, so much storm and drang, right? Like all of this, like that is a hugely nerve-wracking situation to be in and calls upon an immense amount of faith. And there will be times, I suppose, in everybody's life where you will need to make a decision like that. But to me, I feel like sometimes it's almost a little bit harder to work with, to apply that same thinking on a daily basis. To apply that same, I'm going to let the cards fall where they may in situations where the consequences are not so dire. Because when the consequences are dire, it makes it a very, very stark choice. And whether you go one way or another, the choice is very, very clear and delineated. It's bolded, and underlined and italicized. Making that choice on smaller levels on a daily basis, I feel like, is another challenge because it requires such a mindfulness. The great thing about being in a crushing situation like the subject of the story you told is that she cannot escape it. It is right in front of her face. It's impossible to be ignored. But we have moments in our lives, small moments, where it's very possible to ignore it. And to bring faith to bear on those moments, even when it isn't announcing itself and screaming at us, that to me is part of. It's a very, very subtle and advanced walking of the path, in my opinion, because it is not requiring there's something that the Confederation says, I don't remember which context, but they say, the reason why you notice catalepsis in negative experiences is because you don't seem to grow when we have positive experience. When you have positive experiences, you have the same catalytic potential, but you don't exercise it. So if you used the material of your life during the good times, the bad times wouldn't be so necessary. And that's kind of how I see this, is that if we could just have the presence of mind to see every small challenge in our lives as just as pregnant with potential as that, crushing decision that the subject of your story had to make. And we've all had experiences where we needed to, where it was plain before our faces. Then it wouldn't be that we could avoid any future suffering. That's not what I'm saying, but that we could make more use of life and we could work on ourselves so that in every situation we are prepared to serve. We are prepared to meet people where they're at. We've done the work ahead of time.
Yes.
It doesn't need to be this big transformational point where we can't deny it. We can just go with the flow.
Well, there's this idea that if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, you cannot change until you hit rock bottom. Like everyone's got to find that rock bottom for them. And all rock bottom is when that choice becomes so obvious that you have to make this or you're going to die, or you're going to whatever. But it's that inevitable buildup of that choice. Well, at any point, we always have a choice, but the choices are smaller, So I really like the way you articulated that, because I had never thought of that, where that is an extreme example of choice, but one where it's almost as if you are at a fork in the road, and
mindfulness is imposed upon you, right? It's imposed.
Yes, a great way of putting that. So, it's just interesting to think that each and every day in the lives that we live, there are small choices. And when we fail to, I'm going to throw this out there. When we fail to make the quote unquote right choices, or the choices that move us in the direction we want to go, that builds pressure. That small choice that it's suboptimal stacks, and they keep stacking and they keep stacking, and the weight keeps getting heavier. And sooner or later, that choice will become more extreme. Because maybe it's the emotional cost or whatever effect it's having on your life, it just becomes more expensive, and you got to pay that cost sooner or later of changing your choices,
Yep. And we also, I think sometimes I've thought this way, that when we see others who we think should change their path, we can often, out of frustration, present them with what we think is an unavoidable imposition of mindfulness, a challenge. You've got to answer yes or no to me. And that can feel like we're being honest with them. We're giving them a stark choice to make, and it's time for them to make it. But is it really our place to do that? I would argue no, and that reflects, again, more of our own insecurity with the choices we've made. It makes, it reflects our own inability to balance things on our end and use our opportunities for transformation wisely. That we feel that the only way that we can serve is to throw somebody in the deep end of the pool by challenging them or calling them out or anything like that. It's something I've learned a lot in my life, and I'm just coming around to how clumsy a form of service it is. I don't deny that it partakes of a little bit of arrogance to think that you are the thing that needs to challenge another person to be better. But I do think that it often does come from a place of something does need to change. The question is it projection to think that it's the other that needs to change in a situation where I feel pressure, I feel discomfort?
Yes. Especially when you've put in the work for yourself and you have seen the progress. It's like going to the gym. And, if you're working out for years, you see a change, not just in your body, but in yourself as a person. And when you put in that amount of work and you see someone else struggling, it can be easy to say, I know what you need to do. You need to go work out. You need to go exercise. I mean, look what it did for me. And going back to the theme of this, having the humility and being humble enough to just recognize that everyone is on a different path. And what worked, what exercise might have done for me may not be the key to the other person's problems, but just be humble about it. Just love, hear them out, be there for them. It's okay to not judge or try to impose, though it can be hard.
It's okay to not even know how to respond.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, that is often what freaks me out is that I can open up to another person and show them love, but then what do I do next?
Mm.
It, I find that it is often a self-imposed urgency that is born of a desire to be a certain kind of person to another self, the kind of person that I want to be and desperately need to see the other person seeing.
Sure. That's pretty funny.
It's the funny thing about the magic of the present moment is that although it is where all choice occurs, where all like real transformation occurs, if it's not something you appreciate in this moment, there will be another.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of time. The more that we can become mindful and patient with ourselves and others, the more room we give people. Time, it's pretty clear that time, as we experience it, is a matter of perception. And we rush ourselves and we give ourselves room and patience and space to grow as we see fit. This is largely what the value of mindfulness and meditation is. Meditation is not about, as Pema Chodron says, becoming great meditators. It's about being able to bring that meditative state of mind into waking reality more and more and more, so that we give ourselves a chance to see potential, and we give ourselves a chance for that love that's radiating out of us to meet the other self, to meet the situation, and to let it work. Things take time. This process of seeking is just that. It is a process. You never capture it in one moment fully.
Mm.
And so the more that you can give yourself room to grow, the more you'll see growth happen.
Yeah. It's about the journey. Don't be so anxious to get to the destination.
Yeah. And give other people room for them to grow. Mm-hmm. That is what is freeing about service. When we free other people to be themselves and to show us a part of the Creator that we could never have anticipated. It seems alien now, but it is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And all we have to do is look more closely and with more love and let that person show us who they are really. A lot of times we try to rush people on a path that we think is appropriate for them because it's appropriate for us, like I said before. And, part of the faith of service and freeing others and giving them space is the curiosity, like we talked about before, of seeing what they have to show us. Mm-hmm. I mean, you often can't recognize it right away. It takes time to sink into your different levels of psyche, and frankly, to sink into others' levels of psyche.
Yeah.
Like, this world is so hurried. And I struggle every morning with having a meditation and getting into work on time. Mm-hmm. It is a challenge every morning to provide the resources for myself that don't come at my employer's expense. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But that is a great way to ensure, maybe I don't get it right every single time, but the continual attempt and the continual expression of care for my own path and my own seeking, that creates a pattern, that creates a momentum. And it's that momentum that as seekers, we are really trying to build so that we can make mistakes and not get completely sidetracked.
One aspect we haven't addressed about having humility and not judging others is not judging yourself.
Right.
And being humble even with yourself and being understanding even of yourself.
Yeah. Once you take full stock of the situation and realize how little your conscious mind really controls in a final sense, that that I find, and we entertain the illusion that we are directing things all the time. That is a kind of lacking of mindfulness, because it's not paying attention to anything that doesn't immediately respond to our command, right? But if we can start to pay attention to all that is going on within ourselves and without ourselves, regardless of whether it snaps to attention when we ask it to, we start to realize that a cooperative approach to life, which sees the self as a kind of, I keep coming back to dance, but dance is what it feels like, because it's always in motion. It's never something that you can put your finger on and say, that's the position you get into. Well, it's only the position in that moment. Then it changes, and then it changes again. And only a flow can meet that. Only a flow of love that is open-ended and expressing something that we ourselves can't pigeonhole and put in a box and say, that's what it is. That's ideology, that's religion and dogma and all that. It has a place as an intellectual tool, and the seeker is challenged, I believe, through the material of life to open that box and to let it out and to see how it works when it isn't confined by this square shape, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my friend, I'm about out of ideas when it comes to this
this
subject.
We went to some other places in the last recording, but I almost feel that this is a little bit tighter of a package, to use that metaphor again. And I'm happy to leave it here.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Well, thanks again for a great morning chat.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much once again, listeners, for joining us. If you have any thoughts, comments, questions, you know how to reach us. Inaudible.show is our website. We got a contact form right on there. So just give us a ring. In the meantime, have a great week or two until we speak again, and stay in the love and light.